Welcome back, capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today we are looking back at what was a nuclear week 2 of the 2024 college football season. There were a lot of great matchups, a bunch of upsets, and as always, if you enjoy, be sure to like and subscribe. And without further ado, let's jump right into it. Now, if you have not heard, we are potentially giving away $100 to one of our subscribers. If you want a chance at winning, be sure to follow us on social media. The links to those will be in the description down below, but that is only if we do not correctly predict over 75% of the college football games this year correctly. And to go over our predictions from this past week, they will be flashing up on your screen as you are watching this video. And overall this week, we struggled a bit in predicting the chaos. We correctly predicted only 55 out of the 78 total games from this weekend. Not bad, but not quite what we want to see. That brings us to 121 of 151 correct predictions on the year for a winning percentage of 80.1. Still over that 75% threshold, but teetering on the edge. So you still have a great shot at that $100 at the end of the season. So be sure to follow us and stay tuned for our updates. Jumping into our next topic, we're going to be revisiting our big impact matchups from this past week, starting with Arkansas at Oklahoma State. And we predicted this one would end Oklahoma State 28, Arkansas 17. But the final score was Oklahoma State 39-31 in double overtime. And this game was just awesome. We got to see it all in this one. Big plays, big stops, big comebacks, and a thrilling double overtime matchup. And while we did say that we trusted Oklahoma State more in this one, we have to give it to Arkansas. They played phenomenally. And we did say if Talon Green was on point again, the Cowboys would be in for a long day, and that is exactly what happened. He had over 400 yards through the air, and their running back, Jaquindon Jackson, also had a huge day. But in the end, slow and steady won the race. Oklahoma State was able to stay calm. They were able to play their brand of football throughout the whole game. And most importantly, they won the turnover battle, which is what led them to win in double overtime. Your player of the game in this one is defensive back Cale Smith. He had a huge pick six to turn the tide in favor of Oklahoma State early on in the game when they were down by 2 touchdowns. It was very key in this game. The offense wasn't really working how Mike Gundy thought it should, and this one really turned it around. So for that, Cale Smith is your player of the game. And next we had Iowa State taking on Iowa in the battle for the Cy-Hawk Trophy. Our prediction in this one was Iowa 20-16, and the final score was Iowa State 20-19. Now, this is about the kind of matchup we expected from these two. It was gritty, it was tough. A lot of Iowa branded football was played between these two Iowa teams, believe it or not. And by the end of it, Iowa State was able to kick the game-winning field goal. They drove down the field with very little time left in the game. And man, we should have trusted our gut here. I know it could have gone either way. It was a close game all the way, but I can't help but think back to the preseason when we said we thought Iowa State was the better team here. We didn't predict it this week, and we paid for it. The Cyclones are rolling early, but the Hawkeyes have nothing to hang their heads about. Their defense was there, the run game was there. They just wound up on the wrong side of an Iowa style football game. And for your player of the game, it's gonna be kicker Kyle Conradi. He went 2 for 2 in extra points, 2 for 3 in field goals with a 54-yard game winner. And man, did he have a day. He doinked his first attempt off the upright going into halftime, but came back with a vengeance, hitting his first field goal to bring the score to within 2 points in the fourth quarter, and then his second to win the game for the Cyclones. Absolutely the kind of performance you want to see from your kicker if you're Matt Campbell. He didn't get rattled by the early miss and then came back and hit 2 pretty lengthy field goals to secure that win. And next we have Tennessee versus NC State in Charlotte. We predicted the final score would be 45-17, and the final score was 51 21-10. I think we called this one pretty nicely. Not exactly the same score, obviously, but within reason. Looking back at our last video, we said these teams were just on different levels, and surprisingly, we were just a bit off on how different these teams actually were. Tennessee looks like an absolute playoff contender. They are a great all-around team. They held the Wolfpack to just under 150 total yards on the day while going for over 450 themselves. All around dominance from the Volunteers. And on the other hand, man, does NC State look disappointing. I mean, it is a long season. They have time to improve, but we thought they would get off much stronger. We thought this would be a much closer game coming into the year, but after that week 1 performance, we just had no confidence. And they've been a bit uninspiring all around to this point. And for your player of the game, it's going to be the running back, Dylan Sampson. He had 20 carries for 132 yards and 2 touchdowns. And what a game this was for him, really living up to the preseason hype we gave him here. Excellent performance from him in Charlotte. And next we had App State going to Clemson to take on the Tigers. We had the final score of this one being Clemson taking the W 27-20. And man, did they show out. They won 66-20. And this is not what we expected at all. Obviously, we thought it would be a much closer game. But Clemson went out and they showed out. And we're going to go ahead and take some of the credit for that. We know Dabo's watching right now. And we think the tough love we gave him is exactly what they needed. Just kidding. In all seriousness, they looked great, especially Cade Klubnik, which was a major surprise. He did not look great at all in week 1. They did play Georgia, but still did not play great. This week, though, he balled out for over 350 yards and 5 touchdowns through the air. Great performance, and they held App State to very few big plays. Great all-around performance for the Tigers, and your player of the game is the quarterback, Cade Klubnik. Like we said, great performance against the Mountaineers. And next was Boise State at Oregon. We had the final score of this one being Oregon 42-24, and it was a lot closer. Oregon narrowly won by 3 points, 37-34. And what a battle this one was. Boise State drove this game to the wire, and we tried to warn the Ducks, and we think they listened a little bit. They looked a good bit better than they did in week 1, but still definitely a beatable team in the Big Ten. Still a long season to go, and we do think they are a team that will improve throughout the year. Their offense and defense have shown glimpses of what they can be. It'll just be a matter of putting it all together when it matters most. But on the other side, Boise State looked great. They're absolutely a group of 5 contender. And if there's a candidate out of the group of 5 for the Heisman Trophy, Ashton Jeanty is him. He has been a beast so far. He's rushed for over 450 yards and 9 touchdowns through just 2 games so far this season. 9 rushing touchdowns in 2 games is ridiculous. Absolutely unbelievable. Video game type numbers there for Jeanty. And the Broncos came up just short of beating the Ducks. For your player of the game, it's going to be wide receiver Evan Stewart. He had a very solid game, going for 5 receptions, 112 yards, and a touchdown. And next, we have Texas at Michigan. We thought this one was going to be a lot closer. We had Texas pulling out the victory 28-20. The final score of that one was Texas 31-12. And simply put, Texas had Michigan in a headlock the whole game. Wasn't really super competitive, although Michigan's defense was able to keep it within reach early on. The offense just could not put anything together, and give credit to Texas's defense there, but we knew going into this game that Michigan was going to have to overachieve offensively in order to win this game. The quarterback situation there is not ideal, like we've said a number of times on this channel. Michigan's defense will keep them in a lot of games and probably win a good few of those, but they need to find an identity on offense going forward if they want to complement that defense. Let's talk about Texas. They're a phenomenal team on both sides. Quinn Ewers has been elite through their first 2 games. The running game has been a great complement to that, as well as the offensive line. And as an underrated stat in that game, they were so great on 3rd down. They went 10 for 16. Well over half of those they converted. Just amazing all-around numbers, great showing by the Longhorns, and your player of the game is the quarterback, Quinn Ewers. He went 24 of 36 for 246 yards and 3 touchdowns through the air. And for your O&O Sports Game of the Week, we had Colorado going to Lincoln to take on the Nebraska Cornhuskers. We predicted the final score of this one to be Nebraska 28-24, and the final was Nebraska 28-10. And the atmosphere in this game was electrifying, and when Nebraska is good, you can expect that. It has just been a while since that's been the case, but spoiler alert, they might be back. They absolutely shut down Colorado. They were +2 in the turnover margin, dominated time of possession, and they just played their brand of football, and you could tell that was the biggest difference in this one. Nebraska clearly had an identity and they stuck to it, and they were very effective in it. They leaned on that Colorado defensive line all night, wore them down, and beat them over the top a few times as the cherry on top. But for Colorado, it was the exact opposite, and that's about what you can expect from a team that essentially runs a basketball style ISO offense, where you just give Shadur the ball and hope he finds someone down the field. They had no identity. They couldn't get much going consistently. They let Shadur get sacked 6 total times, which is absolutely unacceptable. Colorado has a lot to work out if they want to go above 500 this year. And for your player of the game, we have defensive back Tommy Hill. He had 4 tackles and a pick 6 off Shadur Sanders, a rare pick 6 at that gave Nebraska a 14-point lead early on that they never looked back from. And moving on to your team and player of the week, we're going to preface it by saying we're going to be doing a vote on this channel of who you think the team and player of the week should be for that week. So be on the lookout for that in the future. This week, you voted for your capital T team of the week, and we have the Clemson Tigers. There's not much more to say that we haven't already said. The people have spoken, and they think the performance Clemson had against App State is worthy of the Week 2 Team of the Week honors. And we'd have to agree. We think Northern Illinois had a great performance, and they were a close second in this poll. But we are a democracy here, and boy, was it a great one. Over 700 total yards on the game. Absolutely phenomenal for a team that struggled to move the ball in Week 1. And for your capital P player of the week, you also voted, and the Clemson Tigers have swept the voting this week. We have quarterback Cade Klubnik. He had a performance reminiscent of Trevor Lawrence circa 2019. It was a great bounce back performance from him. Over 300 yards of total offense and over 7 total touchdowns. Great game for him. He is your capital P player of the week. And for our next segment, let's talk about the biggest risers and fallers of the week. For your risers, we are starting off with Nebraska. They looked flat out dominant, like we said. We know this score may not reflect that as much, but the Cornhuskers had control over the entire course of that game. Something we're not used to seeing in recent years for Nebraska, and that is why they're our top riser this week. Matt Rule has Nebraska humming in his second year as their head coach. Next, we have the Syracuse Orange. We were pretty low on them coming into this year. Our own fans tried to tell us they were going to be different this year, and we didn't believe them. Obviously, there's still a lot of season left, so you never really know what could happen. But thus far, the Syracuse Orange have looked magnificent under first-year head coach Fran Brown. And likewise, Kyle McCord has looked like one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC. Excellent performance all around to be a ranked Georgia Tech team this week. And that makes them our second riser this week. And our third is the South Carolina Gamecocks. And boy, does that defense look solid. We highlighted this game before the week because we thought the defense would play a big factor in this game. But even we did not think they would go out and have the performance they did. They had 5 total sacks, 11 tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, 2 forced fumbles, and a touchdown against the Kentucky Wildcats. Just pure dominance on that side of the ball, and that has to be exciting if you are a Gamecocks fan. They are our third riser of the week. And going into our fallers, our first of this week is going to be Notre Dame. Now, this should be self-explanatory. We were very high on the Irish coming out of the offseason and after their week 1 performance against the Aggies of Texas A&M. And we still are, relatively speaking, but after a sloppy upset loss to the NIU Huskies, we have no choice but to have them sliding quite a bit this week. But in all fairness, the Huskies went out and played a capital F football game if we've ever seen one. And their coach, man, what a great post-game interview he had. And while we did have NIU making a MAC conference title appearance in our preseason preview, not even we expected them to go out and upset the number 5 team in the country. Following Notre Dame, we have SMU, another team we were relatively high on coming into the year. Not as high as some others, surprisingly. We heard a lot of people talking about a potential ACC dark horse season, and I'm 99% sure we didn't go that far, although you can correct me if I'm wrong here. And they've come out so far and looked okay-ish. At best, they struggled a good bit in week 0, and this week they were knocked off at home versus BYU. And they have not been playing great football this far. They've been dealing with injuries, but still not great football at all. And they've got a long road ahead, still some winnable games on their schedule, but they're really gonna have to tighten it up if they want to see a bowl game this year. And for our third faller, it's going to be the Michigan Wolverines. And this one was hard for us. The Wolverines are our third faller of this week just because that offense does not look very competitive. And it's hard to imagine them beating a lot of their tough opponents this year when they looked very bad on third down. They couldn't generate a ton of yards on the ground. Obviously have 2 pretty weak quarterbacks, and they turned the ball over consistently. And we thought Michigan's offense could be fairly average coming into the year, but thus far they have looked bad. And with that out of the way, let's get right into the O&O Sports Top 25 Power Ranking for week 3 of the college football season. And let's start off with some teams who dropped out this week. Of those, we have Iowa, Georgia Tech, and NC State, who all dropped from 23, 22, and 18 all the way out of the top 25. And let's go ahead and starting with a new team, the South Carolina Gamecocks, appearing at number 25. They had a strong defense and maybe an improved offense. I mean, Lenore Sellers looked okay at quarterback. He's still very young, still learning, still definitely not amazing. But from week 1 to week 2, we noticed a good amount of progression from him. And most importantly, he had some solid backs and a very solid defense to help complement his play. And at 24, we have Vanderbilt moving up 1 spot. Decent showing against FCS Alcorn State. They showcased a great rushing attack again and a great defensive performance. Most importantly, they looked dialed in. Now, it was an FCS program, but they held Alcorn to under 100 total yards in the game and 2 turnovers. Now, penalties are going to be a big thing for the Vandals going forward. Didn't look great in that aspect in this game, but still a lot to build off for them going forward. Next, we have UCF also moving up 1 spot. They looked great once again offensively versus Sam Houston. And what a great run game they have. They had 3 running backs, a quarterback, and a wide receiver all rush for over 50 yards in this one, with 6 total rushing touchdowns. KJ Jefferson also looked efficient through the air, though not a magnificent game by him, but very efficient nonetheless. And at 22, we have another new team. It's the Syracuse Orange. Now, like we said earlier, one of our biggest risers. That team as a whole looks solid, and they could be playing a much bigger role in the outcome of the ACC than we initially expected this season. And next, our third new team at 21, we have the Nebraska Cornhuskers. Another big riser. Dylan Raiola looks solid. Didn't have an amazing day for the Huskers, but didn't need to. As long as he doesn't cough up the ball and can push the ball down the field efficiently, this team is going to see a lot of success. We knew this coming in, and now it's coming to fruition as Nebraska debuts in our top 25 at number 21. And at 20, we have Kansas State moving up 1 spot. Very close game with Tulane. We had them on pretty high upset alert coming into this game, and we just found out why. Tulane is not a bad team at all, but the Wildcats managed to escape with the W, and with a pretty solid group of 5 win at that. They'll move up 1 point in our rankings, mainly because we had a lot of followers this go around. And speaking of followers, we have number 19, Notre Dame. They drop 14 spots, the biggest drop of the season thus far. It's because they were upset by NIU at home. Devastating loss for the season. There's still a route for Notre Dame to make the playoffs, but it will be much more difficult at this point, and they'll have to be much better the rest of the way in order to do so. And next, another follower at number 18, we have Michigan. We've talked about them enough in this one, so we won't bore you with another synopsis of them. They drop 4 spots this week. And next we have Iowa State moving up 3 spots to number 17. Great win over Iowa, looked solid both ways. We have a feeling Rocco Becht is going to have a great and underrated season this year, with help from that defense that should be putting him in great positions to win this season. At 16, we have LSU. We have them standing still because they looked shaky against FCS Nichols. Not what you want to see at all. Still won by a good amount, but it was a relatively close game going into the half. LSU has got to be more focused, like we said last week. And it seems like underestimating opponents may be a theme for the Tigers this year, as it was in the first half of this game. And moving along at 15, we have Clemson moving up 4 spots. Just a great win, flat out, absolutely obliterated a solid App State team in highly motivating fashion. Already an up and down season for the Tigers, but they'll take this kind of win whenever they can get it. Next, we have Oklahoma State at number 14. They move up 3 spots because they beat an Arkansas team that doesn't look bad at all, but still gonna have to figure out how to get Gordon in space more. He got plenty of touches in this one, but they could not really open up any holes for him. They put the game in Alan Bowman's hands, and he had to throw it nearly 50 times in this game, and he delivered. Defense generated a number of turnovers, and they got the narrow victory over the Razorbacks. At 13, we have Oklahoma. They're standing still. It was a tough showing versus Houston, and we don't feel comfortable moving them up because of it. Gonna need to see more from that offense in the next game. And at 12, we have USC moving up 3 spots. They look great, and they've essentially been the inverse of Nebraska this season. All they needed was to not be absolutely terrible on defense to drastically improve this year, and while there is still plenty to work out on that side of the ball, they have not looked half bad. They move up 3 spots this week. Excited to see how they develop going forward. At 11, we have the Utah Utes. Decent win over Baylor. Wasn't flashy, wasn't mistake-free, but still a decent showing from that defense. We feel comfortable keeping them at 11 this week. However, at 10, we have Penn State. A scary day it was for the Nittany Lions, and overall, it was a very scary day for anyone who looked past their group of 5 matchups. Luckily for James Franklin and Penn State, though, they dug deep and pulled this one out of the claws of defeat. It was a bit of a shakier performance this week from Drew Aller, but his running backs more than made up for it. Both Katron Allen and Nick Singleton rushed for over 100 yards. A great sign for Penn State's offense, but not for their defense, and that's why we have them sitting still this week. And at 9, we have Oregon dropping 3 spots. Not a great first 2 weeks for the Ducks. We still think they can be a great team, so we're not absolutely bailing on them to start the year, but gonna need to see improvement in a lot of areas if they want to see the playoffs this season. And at 8, we have Miami jumping all the way up 4 spots. Another great showing for the Hurricanes against FCS Florida A&M, and another great showing for Cam Ward. He threw for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns and rushed for an additional touchdown. Miami is looking real good to start the year. Don't want to speak too soon, but we like what we've seen from them so far. And at 7, we have Missouri moving up 1 spot, and they have looked great so far, but have played 2 very bad opponents, so we don't have them rising any further than 1 spot this week. Should be a great first real test for them against Boston College this week, but for now, we're keeping them at number 7. And at number 6, we have Alabama moving up 1 spot also. A low-key, not great performance for the Tide this week. but you wouldn't be able to tell that from the final score, and it's probably just another case of looking past an opponent. You would think they'd have learned from last year's game against USF, but it is an all-new coaching staff, and they absolutely looked a lot better in this game than they did in last year's, so can't really complain much there. And at number 5, we have Tennessee jumping up and moving up 4 spots this week. Another big riser. We think NC State was probably a good bit overrated coming into the season and this week in general, but it was still an utterly dominant performance, and that's why we have them rising all the way to number 5 in the country. And for our top 4, we have no movement, maybe a bit controversially. We have Ole Miss staying at 4. They beat up on another bad team. Still look good, but need to see them versus a better team to get a full assessment on them. At 3, we have Texas staying still. They whooped Michigan badly. We could see them moving up, but for now, we're comfortable keeping them right where they are. At 2, we have Ohio State. They haven't looked super amazing so far. Obviously, really good, but they haven't needed to be super amazing. We think they're still the second best team in the country, and it's going to be interesting to see if they drop any further in the AP poll in the coming weeks, just because their first 4 games are going to be pretty weak. Don't want to sneak this Michigan State there, but they aren't going to be world beaters, most likely. And at number 1, we have the Georgia Bulldogs. No surprises here. They looked great again this week. And with Clemson having the kind of performance they had, it probably helps Georgia out even more in this case. That game is already looking like a great resume booster for them, and they easily look like the most complete team in the sport so far this season. And that is why we have them staying put at number 1 overall. And that's going to do it for this video. Be sure to tune in later this week for our week 3 preview. Be sure to follow us on social media for a chance at $100 this season. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.